The morning it almost ended. It began the way most mornings began. With a suit. With a watch. With a car waiting at the gate. Adrian Moss stepped out of the front door of his Kensington townhouse at 8:47, adjusting his cufflinks with the automatic precision of a man who had performed this exact sequence of movements so many times it had stopped requiring thought. Briefcase in his right hand, phone in his left, the faint smell of rain on cold London stone. He had a 9 o'clock call and a 10:30 meeting in the city, and a lunch that would become a negotiation, and an afternoon that would bleed into evening the way his afternoons always did. He had been running at this pace for 11 years. He no longer noticed it. What he noticed, very suddenly, was a small hand on his sleeve. He looked down. A girl, maybe 8 years old, stood beside him on the front steps. Small, dark-eyed, wearing a school uniform that was slightly too big in the shoulders. She was the daughter of Thomas, the groundskeeper who maintained the rear garden and the small stone outbuilding at the back of the property. Her name was Clara. He had seen her perhaps a dozen times in the 2 years Thomas had worked here. She sometimes sat on the low wall near the garden reading. She sometimes watched the pigeons that landed on the rear terrace with an intensity that suggested she was cataloging them. She had never spoken to him directly before. "Mr. Moss," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "Clara," he said, slightly surprised. "Shouldn't you be at school?" "In a moment," she said, "but I need to tell you something first." He glanced at the car waiting at the end of the short driveway. Black, his usual car, Oliver standing beside it as Oliver always stood, left hand resting on the door handle. "I'm in a bit of a hurry," Adrian said, not unkindly. "I know," Clara said. "That's why I need to tell you now, before you get in that car." Something in her voice made him pause. Not panic. Not urgency exactly. Just a quality of seriousness that did not belong on the face of an 8-year-old unless the 8-year-old had a very good reason for it. He looked at her properly for the first time. "What is it?" he said. Clara glanced toward the car. Then she took one small step to the side, away from the direct line of sight from the driveway. "Can you come with me?" she said. "Just for a minute. Please don't let them see." "Let who see?" "The man by the car," she said, "and the man inside the house." Adrian looked at Oliver waiting at the car. He had been driving for Adrian for 2 years. Never a problem. Never a late arrival. Never a wrong turn. He looked back at Clara. She was watching him with the particular patience of a child who has decided to wait for an adult to catch up. Adrian Moss had not built 3 companies by ignoring things that felt wrong. He stepped off the front path and followed the girl to the side of the house, behind the low hedge where they could not be seen from the driveway. "Tell me," he said. Clara told him quietly and without drama, the way she told most things. Yesterday evening, she said, she had been in the rear garden waiting for her father to finish his work. Her father always stayed late on Thursdays to check the drainage near the back wall. She had been sitting behind the wooden compost shed reading because it was sheltered there from the wind. She had heard voices from the downstairs study. The window had been open a crack. The voices were clear enough. "Your wife," Adrian said. "Yes," Clara said. "And a man I don't know. I've seen him come to the house twice before. He always arrives when you're traveling. He always leaves before you're back." Adrian looked at the hedge. He said nothing. Clara continued. She told him what she had heard without embellishment. No drama, just the words as close to exact as an 8-year-old with a very precise mind could recall them. His wife, Serena, had said, "He takes the same car every morning. He never looks at the driver. He never checks the plate. He's always reading his phone before the door is even closed." The man had said, "The car will be at the gate exactly as usual. Our driver will be in Oliver's seat. Oliver won't be there." Serena had said, "And after?" The man had said, "He gets taken to the warehouse in Stratford. We hold him there. Nobody asks questions about a missing businessman for at least 72 hours. By then, the first transfer will have cleared." Adrian was very still now. "What transfer?" he said. "She said 3 million, Clara said. "She said there was an account in her name. She said she had been moving money for 6 months. Small amounts at first so nobody noticed." Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And then she said something else," Clara said. "What?" Clara looked at him steadily. She said, "He never looks at me anyway. He won't even know it was me." The words landed without any softening. Clara had not tried to protect him from them. She just said them because they were true and he needed to know. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian said, "Did they see you?" "No," Clara said. "I was behind the shed." They couldn't see the garden from the study window unless they opened it all the way. They only had it open a crack. "And your father, does he know?" "No," Clara said. "I didn't want to tell him first because I was worried the wrong person might hear." Adrian looked at her. "You were worried about that?" "Yes," she said. "My dad works here. If I told him and he told the wrong person, he could lose his job. So I decided to tell you directly." Adrian Moss stood behind the hedge of his own house in Kensington on a Thursday morning and understood that the most important decision of this day had already been made by an 8-year-old girl who had chosen to find him before he reached the car. "Thank you, Clara," he said quietly. She nodded once. Then she said, "Are you going to get in the car?" "No," he said, "I'm not." He called his deputy, James Harker, from behind the hedge with his voice, so low the words barely carried. James answered on the second ring. "Don't react to what I'm about to say," Adrian said immediately. "Just listen." "All right," James said, his voice shifting to the careful neutral of someone who had known Adrian long enough to understand when something serious was happening. "I need you to call the police, not the general line. I need a detective, a senior one. I need someone who handles financial crime. Tell them it concerns a planned abduction and ongoing fraud involving company accounts. Tell them the situation is live, and they need to move today." There was a very short silence. "Do you need me to come to you?" James asked. "Not yet," Adrian said. "I need you to call quietly. And I need you to get into the company accounts and look for any transfers made in amounts under £20,000 over the last 6 months. All of them. Any account you don't recognize, you flag it immediately." "I can start that now," James said. "Don't tell anyone in the office, not your assistant, not legal, not anyone until I tell you otherwise." "Understood," James said. "Adrian, are you safe right now?" Adrian looked at Clara standing beside him with her school bag over one shoulder, watching him with dark eyes that had already seen more of the truth of his life than most people in his actual life. "For now," Adrian said. "Call me back in 20 minutes. He hung up and looked at Clara. "I need to keep you close for a little while," he said. "Is there somewhere you can be that isn't school and isn't the garden?" Clara thought for a moment. "Mrs. Holt next door lets me sit in her kitchen sometimes," she said. "She has biscuits." Adrian almost smiled. "Go to Mrs. Holt," he said. "Don't tell her anything. Just tell her your dad said to wait there, and don't use your phone." Clara reached into her school bag and held up a small battered phone. "It's my dad's old one," she said. "It doesn't really work." "Good," Adrian said. "Go." She went. No argument, no extra questions. Just turned and walked through the side gate toward the neighboring house with the quiet efficiency of a person who has been given a task and intends to complete it. Adrian waited until she was out of sight. Then he turned and looked at the driveway. The black car was still there. The man standing beside it was still standing in exactly the posture Oliver always stood in. Same coat, same build, different man. Adrian took a slow breath and walked back toward the front of the house. He did not go to the car. He went inside instead, through the side entrance, past the boot room, into the kitchen. Mrs. Crane, the housekeeper, looked up from the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Moss. I thought you'd already left." "Change of plans," he said. "Is Mrs. Moss downstairs?" "She was in the sitting room about 10 minutes ago," Mrs. Crane said. Adrian nodded and walked down the hall toward his study. He did not go to the sitting room. He needed 30 seconds of quiet and a closed door. In his study, he sat down and looked at the room. 11 years of working life on these shelves. Photographs, books, framed articles, a model of the first building his company had ever developed. The desk where he signed contracts. The window where the voices had been heard last night. He stood and walked to the window. He looked at the latch. It was pushed slightly open. Not all the way, just a crack, exactly as Clara had said. He sat back down and thought about what Serena had said. "He never looks at me anyway." He tried to find anger and found instead something quieter and more honest. Because the truth was that she was not entirely wrong. He had been present in this house, the way a piece of furniture is present, physically occupying space without actually being there. He was not surprised she was unhappy. He was surprised by what she had decided to do about it. His phone buzzed. James, he answered. 6 accounts, James said immediately. All of them opened in the last 8 months. Total transferred so far is just over 2.7 million. The transfers are clean on the surface. They go through a holding company registered in Cyprus. Can you trace who controls the holding company? Working on it, James said, but I already found a name as a signatory on 2 of the accounts. Serena Moss. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. The police, he said. Detective Chief Inspector Lawson, James said. Financial Crimes Unit. He said he can be with you within the hour if you want him there. He said this is enough to open a formal investigation immediately. Tell him to come to the back entrance, Adrian said. Tell him to come alone. Tell him my wife is in the house and I don't want her to know the police are here yet. Done, James said. Adrian. Yes. I'm sorry, James said. I know this is not just a business problem. No, Adrian said. It isn't. He hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then he stood up and walked to the sitting room. Serena was by the window with a cup of tea when he walked in. She looked up and her expression moved through several things very quickly before settling on pleasant surprise. I thought you'd left, she said. I came back, he said simply. I forgot something. She smiled. You never forget things. I'm starting to, he said. Apparently. He sat in the chair across from her and looked at her properly. She was 41 years old. She had the kind of face that photographed well for charity galas and board dinners. She was wearing a cream jumper and had her hair loose, and she looked exactly the way she always looked on a Thursday morning. Are you all right? She said. You look pale. I didn't sleep well, he said. She nodded, her eyes moving once to his briefcase still in his hand, then back to his face. A tiny movement, very small. You should take better care of yourself, she said. Yes, he said. You've said that before. They sat there in the sitting room of their Kensington townhouse like a couple having a perfectly ordinary Thursday morning conversation. Adrian looked at her and thought about 11 years. Meetings she had attended with him. Holidays they had taken or half taken, the ones cut short by calls and crises. The dinners they had eaten on opposite sides of tables very similar to the one upstairs. Serena, he said. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. Are you happy? She set her cup down slowly. That's a strange question for a Thursday morning. I know, he said. Are you? She looked at him carefully. The same way she had been looking at him since he walked in. Measuring, calculating. I'm fine, she said. That's not the same thing, he said. She picked up her cup again. What's this about, Adrian? Are you sure you're all right? He stood up. I have some calls to make, he said. I'll be in the study. She watched him cross the room. He felt her eyes on his back all the way to the door. DCI Lawson arrived at 9:45 through the back gate that Thomas usually used. He was a compact man in his 50s, with the unhurried manner of someone who had been investigating serious crimes for long enough to understand that rushing created mistakes. Adrian met him in the garden. They walked slowly along the back wall, low voices, the city noise of a London morning creating a soft barrier around their conversation. Adrian told him everything. Clara's account, the voices through the window, the car at the gate, James's discovery of the accounts, the name of the man who had been visiting the house. Lawson listened without interrupting. Occasionally, he wrote something in a small notebook. When Adrian finished, Lawson said, "The girl who heard the conversation. She's the groundskeeper's daughter." "Yes," Adrian said. "How old?" 8, Adrian said. Lawson nodded slowly. "And she came to you directly. Didn't tell her father, didn't tell anyone else." "She was worried about the wrong person hearing it," Adrian said. Lawson looked at him. "Smart child." "Yes," Adrian said. "She is." "I'll need to speak with her," Lawson said. "A child's testimony requires careful handling, but it's admissible if it's consistent and she can be cross-examined. What she heard would be corroborated by the financial records. What happens now? Adrian said. Now, Lawson said, we do this carefully. The man who arranged the car, what do you know about him? His name, Adrian said. Serena mentioned it once in a different context, Marcus Webb. She said he was a friend.
It's too nice to stay inside.
Meeting by telephone, saying his voice clearly, his mind elsewhere. He signed 2 documents that James sent through, documents that were real and legitimate, and that he had been meaning to sign for a week. Between each of these ordinary things, he thought about the car at the gate, and the man who was not Oliver, and the account in Cyprus, and the number 3 million, and the voice of his wife saying he never looks at me anyway. Serena came to the study door at 11. She knocked gently. I'm going out for a bit, she said. I need some things from the market. He looked up from his desk. I'll come, he said. She paused. You're working. I can work later, he said. I'd like to come. Something moved behind her eyes, very brief, a calculation being made very quickly. Of course, she said, if you want. They walked to the Whole Foods on Kensington High Street together, in the grey London morning. They had walked this street hundreds of times. Serena bought olive oil and bread and a bunch of pale yellow tulips. Adrian carried the bag. They stopped for coffee at the Italian place on the corner. They talked about small things. A television program she had been watching. A problem with the boiler that needed looking at. Whether Thomas's drainage work at the back of the garden had solved the flooding issue. They talked like 2 people who had known each other for 11 years and run out of anything important to say. Walking back, Adrian noticed that she had not looked at her phone once. Not at the market, not at the cafe, not on the street. Serena always had her phone. She checked it between nearly every sentence. Today she left it in her pocket. He understood then. She was waiting. She did not know the car was still at the gate. She did not know he had not simply forgotten something and gone back inside. She was waiting to hear that the plan had worked, and she was trying to behave exactly normally until that word came. He said nothing. When they returned to the house, Lawson was waiting in the study. Serena stopped in the hallway when she saw him. This is DCI Lawson, Adrian said from behind her. He's from the Metropolitan Police Financial Crimes Unit. She turned to look at Adrian. For the first time since he had known her, he saw something he had never seen on her face before. Fear. He's here to ask us some questions, Adrian said quietly. Both of us. Marcus Webb was arrested at his flat in Clerkenwell at 2:15 that afternoon. The man waiting beside the car at the front gate was taken in for questioning at 11:45. He did not wait long before beginning to explain who had hired him and what he had been paid and where he had been told to take Adrian Moss. The warehouse in Stratford existed. Lawson's officers found it that afternoon. It was a rented unit registered to a company name that traced back to Webb through 2 shell layers. Inside were a mattress, 2 bottles of water, a padlocked door with a new lock installed. It had been prepared. Adrian received that information by text from Lawson at 3 o'clock while sitting in the downstairs kitchen because the study was being used for interview. He read the text once, then put his phone face down on the table. Mrs. Crane brought him tea without being asked and then quietly left the room. He sat alone in the kitchen for a while. He thought about the mattress on a warehouse floor in Stratford. He thought about what it would have felt like to wake up there, in the dark, with no phone and no way out and a locked door and a silence that told him nobody was coming. He thought about Oliver, his actual driver. He called him. Oliver answered on the first ring. Mr. Moss, I've been trying to reach you all morning. I arrived at the gate at 8:40 and there was already another car parked there. A man told me there'd been a schedule change. I didn't know. Oliver, Adrian said. You did nothing wrong. Are you all right? Yes, sir. Confused, but yes.
Good morning, sir.
Good,
Good morning,
Adrian said. Take the day. I'll be in touch tomorrow. He hung up and sat quietly for another moment. Then he stood up, walked out the back door, and went to find Clara. She was in the garden with Thomas, who had been told by one of Lawson's officers that something had happened at the house and that he and his daughter should stay in the garden for the time being. Thomas was sitting on the low wall with his hands together, looking worried in the specific way of a man who cannot tell if his job is about to disappear. When Adrian came through the back gate, Thomas started to stand. Please don't, Adrian said. Please stay where you are. He sat down on the wall beside Clara. She was drawing something in a small notebook. She looked up when he sat. "Is it done?" she said. "Yes," he said. "It's done." She looked at his face. "Are you all right?" "That's the second time today someone has asked me that," he said. "What did you say the first time?" "I said I didn't sleep well," he said. "What's the true answer?" Clara said. He looked across the garden at the greenhouse at the far end, where he sometimes stood on summer evenings, because it was the only part of the house that felt quiet in the way he needed quiet to feel. "The true answer," he said slowly, "is that I'm not sure yet, but I'm considerably better than I would have been if you hadn't stopped me this morning." Clara closed her notebook. "I heard them," she said simply. "I couldn't not tell you." "No," he said. "I know, but a lot of people hear things and decide it's not their business." "That's not right," Clara said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who has not yet learned to complicate moral questions. "No," Adrian said, "it isn't." Thomas, beside his daughter, said nothing. He was looking at his hands. Adrian turned to him. "Thomas," he said, "I want you to know that your daughter did something today that I owe her a great deal for. And I want you to know that your position here is not in question in any way. In fact, the opposite is true." Thomas looked up. He had the face of a man trying to understand more than one thing at once. "She acted with more courage and more good sense than most adults I know," Adrian said. "You've raised a remarkable person." Thomas looked at Clara. Something crossed his face that had nothing to do with employment or money. "She takes after her mother," he said quietly. Clara looked at her father and then at her notebook and said nothing. But Adrian could see from the way she held herself that she had heard it and put it somewhere safe. 3 weeks later, the case had become something the newspapers were interested in, which Adrian did not enjoy, but which he understood he could not control. Marcus Webb had been charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, fraud, and money laundering. The man at the gate had made a full statement. The financial evidence was considerable. Serena had retained lawyers. Adrian had retained lawyers. A marriage of 11 years was being dissolved through the careful language of legal process, which was perhaps the only honest language it had spoken in some time. Adrian moved his primary office from the city to a smaller space in Notting Hill, closer to the house. He started finishing work at 7 instead of 10. He started cooking simple things in the evenings because a kitchen at night was quieter than a restaurant, and he had discovered he needed quiet. He called his sister for the first time in 3 years. She answered with the wary caution of someone who had learned not to expect too much, and then they talked for 2 hours. He took a weekend in Cornwall, by himself. He walked along the coast path above Boscastle and looked at the Atlantic and thought about how many mornings he had left his house, already thinking about the meeting at the end of the drive, instead of the life inside it. When he came back to London, he did something he had been meaning to do for 3 weeks. He called Thomas. Thomas answered on the second ring. "I'd like to come to the garden," Adrian said, "if that's all right." "Of course, sir," Thomas said. "When?" "Now," Adrian said. Clara was on the low wall when Adrian came through the back gate, which was exactly where he had expected her to be. She had a different notebook now, a larger one with a green cover. She was drawing the back of the house with the precise observation of someone who looked at buildings the way other people look at faces. "You draw the house a lot," Adrian said, sitting beside her. "I like buildings," she said. "I like how they're made of so many small decisions." Adrian looked at the back of his own house. The Victorian brickwork. The sash windows. The greenhouse at the end that someone had added in the 1930s, and that had never quite matched the original architecture, but had managed to become beautiful in its own way. "So do I," he said. "That's why I started building them." Clara looked at him. "Is that why you made your company?" "Originally," he said. "Somewhere along the way, I started thinking more about the company than the buildings." She thought about this seriously. "My dad says that happens with gardens, too," she said. "You start growing things because you love the plants, and then one day you realize you've been thinking about the business, and you have to remember why you started." Adrian nodded. "Yes," he said, "that's exactly it." He reached into his jacket pocket and took out an envelope. He held it for a moment, then placed it on the stone wall between them. "That's for your education," he said. "It's in a trust." It comes to you when you're 18. You can use it for university or for anything else you choose to do with your life. Clara looked at the envelope but did not touch it. I didn't tell you to get something, she said. I know, Adrian said. That's the point. She looked at him. My dad said you would try to do something like this. What did he say about it? He said I should accept it, she said. He said there's a difference between helping someone because you want something and helping someone because it's right. And if you do something because it's right, it's okay to receive something in return. Adrian looked at Thomas, who was working near the far wall and pretending very convincingly to be interested in the condition of the soil. Your father is right, Adrian said. Clara picked up the envelope carefully and put it in her school bag. She picked up her pencil again and went back to drawing the house. Can I ask you something? Adrian said. Yes, she said, not looking up. When you stopped me at the door that morning, were you frightened? She thought about this for a moment. A little bit, she said. I was worried you wouldn't listen. What made you try anyway? She was quiet for a moment. The pencil moved across the page. My mum died 2 years ago, she said. She was sick for a long time, and at the end she told me something. Adrian waited. She said the only thing she regretted was the times she knew something was wrong and didn't say it, Clara said. She said those were the moments she lost, the ones she couldn't get back. The garden was very quiet. The London sounds were there, sirens in the far distance, a car horn, the particular hum of a city that never fully stops, but they felt distant. So when I heard them, Clara said, I thought about what she told me, and I thought I would rather say it and be wrong than say nothing and be right. Adrian Moss sat on a low stone wall in a London garden on a quiet afternoon and looked at an 8-year-old girl who had understood something about courage that had taken him 11 years and a car at the wrong gate to begin to learn. She would have been proud of you, he said. Clara kept drawing, but he saw her blink once quickly, the way people do when something reaches them somewhere deep. I know, she said softly. I think she would. Some months later, the case concluded. The verdicts were not surprising to anyone who had read the evidence carefully. Adrian Moss restructured his company with James as his co-director and began sleeping regular hours and answering the phone when his sister called. He did not move from the Kensington house immediately, but he started thinking about what he actually wanted from a house, which was a question he had never honestly asked himself before. Thomas continued his work in the garden and took on a second property nearby, which Adrian helped him set up as a small, independent business. He seemed less worried. His shoulders sat differently. Clara started secondary school in September. She was, her teachers noted in her first report, unusually observant and unusually direct, which some teachers found difficult and others found remarkable. On a Friday in November, a letter arrived at the house addressed to Adrian. Inside was a drawing. A careful pencil drawing of the back garden, the greenhouse, the low stone wall, 2 figures sitting on the wall side by side. One tall, one small. Underneath, in very neat handwriting, Clara had written,